Hello, everyone. Today, we are finally talking about my favorite session of mathematics, statistics. And of course, we're going to be dealing with the ACT drama. All right, let's dive into some announcements right fast. All right, we are in rotations for the remainder of the year. So, with the exception of being tested, you guys are going to be in groups. And of course, I'm going to reassign those groups today. Every once in a while. Rotations are prep for ACT. So my goal is to prepare you for ACT since it's around the corner. It's going to be student-led teaching going on, so I'm not going to be the one doing teaching a lot. It's going to be you guys being assigned to work through certain examples. All right, these lessons that we're going to do will not exceed 40 minutes. Tutoring ends on March 6th, so the tutoring that I provide during that specific time at school is going to be done with because, well, we're about to be in testing season and I got a lot of other things to deal with. So that's just that. So, of course, no one's staying after school like that. Just get your tutoring with the time provided within the school day and when we are waiting for core hours to be dismissed. So that's your best time you got. All right. And then just for a reminder, the ACT is your final grade. Since I have discussed ACT math with you guys throughout the year, I taught you the strategies and we went over the skills, you are responsible for it. All right, rotations. This is how we're going to do rotations for the week. So station N, when you're working with me, is going to be statistical skills with the textbook. Station A is an activity or a handout that needs to be completed. Station T is used in pair. And this station H is going to be Kahoot on the board. When I mean board, I mean the table. All right. So in this video, I'm going to go over exactly what is going on in your book for chapter 11. So you're dealing with statistical questions and variables. You guys already know about statistical questions, so you guys this should be an easy lesson because we talked about it through the beginning of the school year. All right, I can use vocabulary related to statistical questions and variables. And then the vocabulary that you have to know that I have to see in your writing as you are explaining your work. Categorical variable, parameter, population, quantitative variable, sample, statistic, statistical question, and statistical variable. So here's a situation that they give you in your textbook. A state questions some of its high schools about the price they are charging for prom tickets. The results are summarized in the histogram. So, what are questions that can be answered using the data in the histogram? Who might be interested in the answer to these questions? Explain. And then your constructive argument. Anastasia is surprised that the median cost of a prom ticket is not higher, given that her school is charging $60 per ticket. What are some possible reasons for her data not conforming to her expectations? So this is something that you will answer in your groups. My job is to observe and take notes of what is going on. All right. Now we're going to dive deep into the lesson. The essential question, what kinds of questions about quantities and relationship among quantities can be answered with statistics? That's the focus of the lesson. All right, let's go through this. And we already started out with the application. That's one thing you're gonna like about statistics. It's all application, so there's not much abstract going on. All right, understand sets and subsets. Consider the following questions. In what month is your birthday? What month has the most birthdays of students at your school? What is the difference between the two questions? Question 1 can be answered using one piece of information. Question 2 can be answered by collecting many pieces of information and then summarizing them. Question 2 is a statistical question because it can be answered by collecting many pieces of information or data and summarizing the data. So when you think about statistical questions, just keep this in mind. It's more than one answer. That's the generic way of looking at that. It's more than one answer because, of course, you have to collect the data from everybody to answer that question. All right? So here's a little tip for you to remember. The answers to statistical questions can be summarized in different types of displays such as bar graphs, line graphs, scatter plots, and frequency charts. We are familiar with some of the graphs, but not all of them. But throughout this beautiful unit, you will. Okay, part B. Does each graph represent the answer to a statistical question? So you got two graphs. One dealing with distance traveled to school, one dealing with travel time at 20 miles average speed. All right. So let's look at the graph that talks about distance traveled to school. It's a scatter plot that represents some students' answers to the question of how far do you travel to get to school. This is a statistical question because it's answered by gathering and summarizing varying data about many students. But let's look at the second graph. The graph of travel time is a function model and represents answers to the question. How long does it take X to travel 20 miles? This question has a predetermined answer. The answer varies predictably with X, so it's not a statistical question. So we have to be a little bit careful when we're looking at graphs to determine statistical questions. But here's an error that we have to discuss. The word data is plural, so it's not singular. So use it in the plural verbs like these data are or the data include. However, set and value are singular, so use singular verbs of them like this data set is or this data value is. So, as I told you about writing in the mathematical sense, this is pretty much how you're going to be writing your information throughout these problems. All right, these are problems that you will have to try. Of course, I don't explain this to you in the video. Just see what you can do and post them if you want to, and we could talk about it. All right. Now, we're going to more of a conceptual understanding. What types of statistical variables is represented by the following question and corresponding chart? So what is your favorite Summer Olympic sports? A statistical variable is a quantity or quality that can be measured or counted and or which data are expected to differ from one observation to another. Two main types are categorical and quantitative. Answer to this question above will be different Olympic sports, as shown by the chart summarizing the various response. Data that can fall into categories or that include qualitative rather than quantitative attributes represent a categorical value. So when we think of categorical variables, I don't know why I said value, but variables, you want to think of just putting things into groups like juniors, sophomores. That's how that works. All right. So let's focus on the communication precisely. Variables in mathematics can be used to represent an unknown number, such as the price of a shirt at a store. Statistical variables represent a quantity that varies between observations, such as the price of the shirt at every store in the country. So that's something that, of course, I need for you guys to distinguish with. So let's just pay close attention to that. All right. So let's get to more of an example of understanding statistical variables. What type of statistical variable is represented by the following question and corresponding graph? So the question that proposed is what type of number of apps a teenager has on a smartphone. So we're looking at this, and let's focus on the study tip there. Some variables, such as month or semester grades, can be categorical or quantitative depending on the context. So when you look at the responses to these questions, like numerical responses, this represents another type of statistical variable called a quantitative variable. Numbers on apps or phones is a quantitative data because the values are numbers that you could meaningfully count, add, subtract, and whatever. All right, I want you to try this. Of course, I won't say much in the video, but one thing I need for you guys to do, make sure you do more than just answer one question. Answer the question with one sentence. Make sure you explain your reasoning as well. So that means you have to be able to use the vocabulary that was just mentioned. All right, distinguish between populations and sample. Before I read this example, just make sure you know that populations is dealing with the whole, simple deals with a part of a whole. For example, when we say kids at Struma, talking about everybody at Struma. But if we are discussing juniors, that is the sample. All right, so here's a situation. A newspaper randomly selected 30 students from each grade to participate in the survey to determine the opinions of students at the school. What is the relationship between sophomores survey and all students survey and all students at the school? All right. So when you answer the question, of course, gotta get with those definitions. In statistics, the set of all members in the group that you want to know something about is called a population. The group of all students at a school is the population that the school newspaper is studying in a survey. A sample is a subset of the population that is being studied to answer a statistical question about the population. So the group of students who are being surveyed is a sample of all students at the school as a group of sophomores who were studied. But one thing that we do have to be careful about when we talk about statistics using the word population, and this is a common misconception, it does not have to be made of people. It can be made of whatever group that is under the study or what you're trying to research. It could be candy, it could be shoes, anything that you want to look up. So just be careful when you think of populations. All right, and we're still distinguishing between populations and samples. A polling organization, and when you think of polling, you think about voting and all of that. Randomly choose eligible voters in the state of Illinois to ask who will they vote for in an upcoming election for governor to determine this who will win the election. What are the sample and the population in this scenario? So the population in this case is all the voters in Illinois who is eligible to vote. And then the sample is all the people the organization asking about the voting plans. The people selected by the polling organization are the subset of the voting population in Illinois. All right. I want you to try this example. Again, make sure you explain each answer with the vocabulary. All right. This is the last example that you need for today's lesson. Distinguish between parameters and statistics. Is each quantity a statistic or a parameter? A high school student had 3 lunch periods. In their random selected lunch period, 24% of students brought lunch from home. A parameter is a measure that describes the population. A statistic is a measure that describes the sample of the population. Regarding this situation, the population is to say all students in the school. The figure 24% describes that population, so that's the statistic. All right. At the end of its first year of business, a movie theater collected data on how well its concession stand operated that year. The theater used its total yearly concession sales and number of tickets sold to calculate that the mean amount spent at concessions at movie goer was $8.14. Is this a statistic or a parameter? So the value again that describes the concession percentages for all moviegoers who went to the movies that year, that is the parameter. All right? So that's pretty much just that. Now, one thing that we gotta generalize is this. Category data are often summarized using proportions, while quantitative data are often summarized using median or mean. So this takes us back to our central tendency we've been working on year round. All right? Trying it and again using the definitions to answer the questions. All right? So let's summarize and be done with it. So a statistical question is a question that can be answered by collecting many pieces of information or data. All right? And this is a fine example as you see here. They're talking about cats and dogs. A parameter is a piece of information about the variable that is used based on the entire population or group of people. A statistic is a piece of information about a variable that is based on the sample or subgroup. Alright, so that's pretty much just that. So I'm going to end it here. And this is pretty much what your lesson is all about. So I am finished. So have a great day. You got any questions, come see me. And that's that.